Hello everyone, it's Martin aka Anders, and in today's Mastering Macro, we're going to be answering one of my most highly asked questions. I get reached out to for general player advice all the time, but one of the most complex questions I get asked is when IGLs come to me and say, how can I be better at shot calling and general in-game analysis? In this video, we're going to showcase a system to be better at that, and also display how it fits into an overall way of thinking about the game that, of all things, is based in traditional military doctrine. Let's jump right into it. To start off with a bit of a history lesson, the military doctrine that we're going to be using in this is called maneuver warfare. In practicality, maneuver warfare has been used all throughout human history, and many of the past's most prominent military theorists have touched on it in one capacity or another. It wasn't until the late 1900s, though, that the US Marines really codified it for the first time. Pivoting immediately to sort of see how we can leverage this, maneuver warfare is broken into really 6 primary pillars. The first of this is to leverage tempo in a way that allows you to both seize and hold initiative. The next, using the German word for focal point, Schwerpunkt, highlights the need for any solid battle plan to have a very clear and concise objective. There is something that your strategy is directed to, and in a perfect world, it's the coalescing point of both your opponent's weaknesses and your strengths at the perfect timings. Next, you have unpredictability, which more or less speaks for itself. Then combined arms or combined resource coordination, adaptability, and a decentralized command. We can take these precepts and transfer them over to Valorant, in some cases in direct form, and in others a little bit more abstractly. First, looking at initiative, this will boil down a lot of the time to our pre-round analysis and synthesis. Schwerpunkt will often be defined by our mid-round analysis and snap decision-making. Unpredictability will be a direct function of our ability to vary tempo as well as deprive info from our opponents. Combined arms will translate directly to our ability to min-max our util efficiently across the entirety of our composition. Adaptability will be a function of our default's flexibility as well as our compositional redundancy that allows us to gap fill as needed. And decentralized command is actually, in my opinion, one of the trickiest to handle here. Many people, when they look at the words decentralized command, will look at that and say, okay, so there is no primary leader. That is not the case here. The objective of a decentralized command isn't to remove the need for a primary leadership role. The goal is to empower each individual within the greater force to make their own decisions based off of new information, and not rely on the sequencing of transferring that information and then waiting on the trickle down of new directions based off of that transference. The way you achieve this in Valorant is through very explicit protocol systems that are built up over time. This isn't a case of each player being a wild gun making decisions willy-nilly. They understand their role within the broader context of the team's plan, and both they and the rest of the team know that when pieces of information X, Y, or Z come through, there are a certain number of reactions that are within the acceptable spectrum for them to then use. If we were to talk about this system ad nauseum, it would take weeks, months, if not a year plus, to go through all of the different theory and philosophy that's involved, so instead we're going to draw it back down to that specific question I asked at the beginning. How can we be better at pre-round analysis and shot calling while fitting into this larger system? For that, we're going to isolate that first bullet of initiative and take a quick look at the OODA Loop. The OODA Loop was developed by famous maneuverist and military theorist John Boyd as a way to systematize the decision-making process of combatants, both yourself and your opponent. That loop is to observe, orient, decide, and then act. Boyd would famously say on countless occasions that the core to seizing initiative from your opponents is to get inside their OODA Loop. The system that we're about to outline in this video for pre-round analysis falls squarely between observation and orientation steps in an OODA Loop. It allows you to not only run through this system more thoroughly yourself, but allows you to look at the primary pivot points that may be affecting your opponent's decision-making process. You'll not only be looping faster yourself, but you'll be able to step into your opponent's loop with more efficacy. I've distilled the system down to something as memorable as possible, the mnemonic buys. This is a sequence you can wheel through at the beginning of every single round, and it will make you more prepared to beat your opponents, whether you be an IGL making a call, or just a general player trying to better understand how you should be approaching round-to-round dynamics. Making it exceedingly easy to remember, the B in buys stands for buys, the economy of either team. The U stands for ultimates, the Y stands for U, and the S stands for setups. Diving a little bit more into each in turn, first we have those buys. This is the combination of both our economy and their economy and how the two interplay. Examples of questions you should be asking yourself: what type of buy does each team have? Is it an eco, a half, a broken, a full with an op, double op even? What expectations does our buy set for our opponent's approach to this round? What expectations does their buy set for us? Understanding how both teams' expectations interplay, as well as how you can bend or warp those expectations, is how you'll be able to glean the most advantage from the economic state of the game, be it in your favor or against you. Next, we have U for ultimates. Everyone's had those rounds where they look back in hindsight and say, wow, I didn't notice they had that, insert ultimate. A breach ulti, a Viper's Pit, something that will fundamentally warp the round that people simply did not pay attention to. We have our ultimates, their ultimates, and the one that is most chronically overlooked, fence ultimates. We should be asking ourselves, what ultimates does each team have? What type of round does our ultimates want us to play? What type of round do their ultimates want them to play? And what fence ultimates are in play? These are those ultimates coming to the round that you're 1 pip off of, 2 pips off of. Things that might come into play the later the round drags out and might deeply affect the broader round dynamic. Moving on to Y, we have you. Your playbook exposure as well as your playbook success. What have you shown your opponent? What set plays? What default variations? How successful have those things been? And more importantly, how has that success or failure driven conditioning in your opponent's mindset? Have you been extremely successful or unsuccessful on one site compared to the other? How is that going to warp your opponent's default moving forward as they try to stop you? And in keeping with that line of thought, we then have S for setups. This is going to be not our own setups, but the setups that we expect from our opponents. What have they shown us? By extension, what do we expect them to run again based off of their success? But not only that, how do we expect them to adapt it in situations where they've failed? At this point, if you're anything like the other people I've talked to about this, you're thinking to yourself, how in the hell do I squeeze this in pre-round? And unfortunately, the only thing I can say is, I promise it's possible. I do it, many of the IGLs I've worked with in the past do it. It is definitely an achievable goal, but it will take a lot of practice. Fortunately on that front, it's fairly easy to practice. You don't have to be playing the game. This wasn't originally an IGL system. In fact, it was back when I was color commentating, and I just wanted to intake and put out as much information as possible to make sure the audience's eyes were where they should be at all times. However, in the process of doing that and practicing, I realized that I was very frequently taking into consideration factors the teams themselves weren't. There are teams that are playing full retake setups into Fence Viper ultimates and then folding the round when that pit goes down on the site that they were playing retake on. There are teams that are counter-aggroing on extremities even when they know the default of their opponent likes to play heavy mid control and will just fast pivot to the opposite site once they see that counter-aggression. Things like this happened over and over again to the point that I realized IGL systems like this straight up don't exist at many teams. They're just not thinking through thoroughly the things that their opponents are showing them, the things that they've shown their opponents, and elements that should be fairly standard in their decision-making process. At that point, I decided I'm going to formalize this and push it out to the public to just see how many people can get value out of it. Whether you be on a competitive roster, whether you just be a solo queue player who's trying to be more comprehensive in the way that they think about this game, I hope that you get something out of this. Per the usual, if you're enjoying my content, you can follow me here. I push stuff out as much as I can, however, I just started working with a new organization, so it's been a little bit sparse as of the recent past. Announcement coming out Monday on that front, by the way. You can also follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, all across the internet, all at AnderzzTV. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.